guys, and welcome back to Mini Urban Farm, a channel about gardening and homesteading in the suburbs. Today it is time to map out the fall garden. Now this is one of my, I want to say like least favorite gardening tasks, but it is something that is so crucial to make sure that the garden is successful and to make sure that it's not being overrun or that the crops aren't smothering each other out. And it's something that has really allowed me to have a lot of success in my garden. So I am going to jump over onto my laptop. I'm going to take this entire garden layout. I'm going to transpose it, I guess you would say, just make like a little faux garden layout on the computer, and then show you exactly how it is that I break down my vegetables and my crops into categories to make sure that everything has the proper space, and also do some succession planting when it gets a little bit cooler. Let's go. Alright guys, so I just came over here into Google Sheets and created my Fall Garden 2021. Now what you're seeing here is basically a list of all of the things I am growing for this season's garden. I did break this down in my last video, so if you want to go check that out, you can see exactly my thoughts on each one of these and why I chose them. Basically, this is the layout of the new garden that I just created 2 videos ago, I think it was. And so we have a fence line here. All of this is fencing and trellising. So the trellis is going to be for everything along the back of the boxes. Over here on the grass, over here on the green areas on that side and that side, those are just grassy areas where I can put my rosemary bushes or pots or whatever other kind of herbs I don't want inside the boxes spreading and just taking over the entire box. In blue here, you can see I have 2 feet, so all of these individual boxes and squares are 1 square foot, 1 square foot, 1 square foot. So I have 30 square feet across, which is the length of the garden, the raised garden bed that we created, and then 2 feet wide. All right, so currently we have 60 square feet in blue, and then the orange is actually not part of the raised bed, but it is going to be whatever I am going to succession plant after, you know, when it gets a little bit cooler outside, because we are still in the like high to, yeah, I guess high 80s or so. And so a lot of these things, like the cool weather crops, the root crops, we can't really grow too many of these currently. And the same thing with some of the leafy greens. We're going to have to wait until it gets a little bit cooler in order to grow those things. So I will be still planting this row out just like normal. And then, you know, I'll try to plant them with things that, that do a little better in the hot weather. And then when it gets a little bit cooler, I will rip up those things and plant in our root crops and our leafy greens that do better in cool weather. So I'll probably, for example, take a lot of the arugula, which grows really fast, mustard, kale, all of these things can be harvested as leafy greens within 30 days. So it's not going to take up too much space. And then a month or 2 later, I'll just be able to plant out my root crops. So down here, everything that has like this pinkish red color is something that does well in a little bit hotter temperature, and then everything in purple is something that needs a little bit cooler weather, just because we are in Central Florida and we kind of have a mix of both. Our fall isn't really a true fall. I mean, it's still in the high 70s, 80s here, and so, you know, we don't really get into the 40s until maybe November and December. Last season, I did plant out a lot of my root crops, like my radishes and even some Brussels sprouts really early on in the season, like mid-September, and a lot of them failed because it was just not cool enough. So I do need to get planting, but you know, we do have a mix of things that grow in the heat, and a lot of these things like my tomatoes and pole beans, they will still make it into December and January in Florida, so I'm not really too concerned about that. You know, I may have to cover some of my stuff, but other than that, that's what I'm going to be doing. So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to fill each one of these little boxes in with something that is going to be growing in them. So the purpose of this video is to show you how it is that I map out my entire garden. I do this every season so that I know, you know, exactly what goes where. I'm not just kind of like throwing things and hoping that they grow, because a lot of things, for example, you know, grow better together. Like if you grow beans with tomatoes, they do really well. But if you grow, you know, tomatoes with onions and stuff, it might not do as well. So I just want to prevent anything from basically dying on me, and I want to have the best success of my garden that I possibly can. And plus, it just makes it a little bit easier for me when it goes to actually, like when it comes time to actually planting things. All right, so the obvious one here is going to be our trellising, right? Because these are things that definitely need trellising, and I only have 1 row of trellis. It is about 30 feet of trellising, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem to get all of these things on those. I will probably not use all of the trellising just because it is a bit, but we'll see. I suspect also that I might not have space for a lot of these, or at least a few of them. I did go a little bit overboard on the seeds this season just because I don't know, I got really excited for the root crops and some of the leafy greens. So if I end up not planting out some of our leafy greens, that's perfectly fine with me. I don't need, what is it, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I don't need like 9 different types of leafy greens. I just went a little bit overboard. The normal ones I plant out are my Swiss chard, mustard, and my arugula. But you know, I did want to plant out, oh, and kale. I usually always plant out kale as well. I do want to experiment with some different types of lettuces though. So we'll see how that goes. If I don't have room for everything, then I guess I will be saving them for the next fall season. But we'll try to fit everything in. So the first one that I'm going to try to fit in, and granted, I will be kind of adjusting these as they go along. It might not be the first take that I get everything. So when you're mapping out your own garden, you know, maybe do this on the computer or do it in pencil or something like that, so that you're not actually, you know, writing these things in pen and then you have to scratch everything. You're going to have to, you know, test out what works and move around. It's kind of like a little jigsaw puzzle. So we'll go from there. So I'm going to do my cherry tomatoes. So I know that, you know, I have individual square feet here. Cherry tomatoes are generally 1 square foot per cherry tomato. So in each of these, I can plant 1 cherry tomato plant. However, in the past, I have been very, very successful with doing them at around 8 to 10 inches apart. So getting them a little bit more, giving them a little bit more space isn't as much of a concern to me, especially because I am working with a very limited square footage here. So I am going to maybe give them, let's say 10 inches or so. All right, so if I do, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that should be 5 feet, which is about 60 inches. And I could probably even get away with 8 inches in between because they're growing vertically. So, I mean, they have all of this space to kind of grow the roots out. I think I'll probably do all of these as cherry tomatoes. So I'm going to come in here and just do cherry tomato. And I'm going to copy this over into my 5 feet. All right. And I do want to make a little notation in here that this is cherry tomato, just because if you start making abbreviations, then you're not going to know what the heck you're talking about afterward. So I'm going to do cherry tomatoes in these 5 feet. And like I said, I might end up playing around with these, but for the most part, you know, let's start and then we can go from there. So this, I'm going to put a little X next to it. That one's done. I am going to also add in my pink bumblebee tomatoes, which is what those are. I'm really excited to grow those. They're really cute little striped bumblebee tomatoes. I've never grown them before. They're supposed to be really sweet though. I'm not, however, going to put them next to my cherry tomatoes because what I have found in the past is that if you grow anything together, like, you know, 4 different types of tomatoes or 6 different types of brassicas or whatever it is, whatever type of pest affects one plant is going to affect the rest of them. So for example, you know, if my Roma tomatoes get wiped out by, you know, aphids or caterpillars or whatever it was that happened last season, my grape tomatoes and my other types of tomatoes were doing just fine. Well, not just fine. Let me take that back. But they did pretty well, even though my other types of tomatoes, you know, were kind of suffering from it because they had been planted out in a completely separate side of the garden. So I'm going to take my bumblebee tomatoes and I'm going to try to place them somewhere over here. Now I'm probably going to do the same number of them, right? I can probably fit like 7 plants or so. Let's just start it off here at the end of the garden, just so that they have some space between them. I'll probably do my Roma tomatoes somewhere around here as well, but they don't really need trellising, so we shall see about that. All right, so I'm gonna go pink bumblebee is gonna be the abbreviation that I'm gonna use, just so that something different. All right, and then I'll add it in here. Okay, and so I've accounted for those ones. Now I have my tomatoes on 2 opposite sides of the garden. I'm going to try to fill in everything that does require a trellis. So I'm gonna stick with my Marvel of Venice pole beans. Now what will happen is I will fill in my butternut squash and my pole beans, and then the snow peas will probably get replaced be the thing that replaces some of the other beans and the butternut squash, right? I mean, I know that butternut squash can generally do pretty well in fall. However, in my experience, it does tend to get a lot of powdery mildew, and I've never had butternut squash that lasts the entire season. Hopefully this season will be different, and then I can just keep the butternut squash instead of planting all the snow peas, but the snow peas will probably be replacing these two when it gets a little bit cooler out. So I'm going to take my Marvel of Venice pole beans, which are my yellow wax pole beans that are really good tasting. And I am going to maybe put them somewhere in here. Now, pole beans, I generally plant out at about like 9 per square foot. Between 6 and 9 per square foot usually ends up being a pretty good number. Still giving them a lot of air to play with, between the leaves and not like get disease and stuff. So I will be planting out per square foot about, let me say, between 6 and 9 of these. So then I will just end up where my mouse is, right? Like I'm going to take 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 towards the back of this little square foot, just kind of like visually, they're not really actually separated per square foot, but just making sure that there's, 6 or 9 of them in here. And then I'm going to just bend the stalks towards the trellis, and then once they get on the trellis, then it's pretty easy. They just climb from there, and I'll just keep trellising them. So I'm going to do maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. That seems like a pretty good amount. So that'll probably be between mid 20 to mid 30 amounts of Marvel of Venice pole beans, which is fine. So then I'm going to do Marvel of Venice. That'll be my abbreviation for this. And that'll be, I got one extra. All right, so that'll be Marvel of Venice. And if I need additional, or there's, room to fill in or something, then I can always add more. All right, so next I'm going to do some butternut squash. And at some point in time, I am going to have to do some sort of companion planting lookup, right? I mean, I'm pretty good about remembering what comes with, certain limitations on companion planting. Like I know that, beans and tomatoes do really well together. Both of these do really well with like basil and different types of parsley and stuff. But, when it comes to like actual like crops like Brussels sprouts, things like that, I'm going to have to look up some of these things as well. So at some point I'm going to have to put in my Brussels sprouts, and I know Brussels sprouts, I've read different things about Brussels sprout companion planting with tomatoes, but the one thing that they don't seem to do very well with is pole beans. Now, I don't know how accurate that is. I've never actually planted out Brussels sprouts next to either of these. My Brussels sprouts have always been in their own separate box away from these, but I think I'm going to just have to take a chance because, of course, these are things that need to be trellised. I'm going to try to see if I can do it next to maybe the butternut squash, so I can kind of like surround some butternut squash here, put some butternut squash here, and then Brussels sprouts do take up a pretty decent size area, so I do want to give them enough room to grow. That's the thing. So I'll probably end up putting some butternut squash here, and then I think last fall I had planted out 4 plants. I'm gonna try to do maybe 5 butternut squash plants this time, or maybe 6. We'll see if there's enough room. So I have my butternut squash. All right, so that's everything that needs to be trellised for now. Again, the snow peas are for a little bit cooler weather, which hasn't happened yet here in Florida. So let's see. The Brussels sprouts are also a little bit cooler season, so maybe I can get away with holding off on those for right now. But the most important thing that I want you to keep in mind is that if you have a trellis and you have vegetables that need to be trellised, then you have to do those first and kind of move them around as needed, because they are not going to do well just sprawling along the ground if you want to keep them for as long as possible. The other thing is that my herbs kind of come in, not as a last thought, but just like I can pretty much like, plop in a few basil plants or a few parsley plants basically anywhere, with a few exceptions. But I mean, I can plant them like underneath my tomatoes. They don't need that many nutrients in the soil. So this is going to be the last category I do more than likely. And then these ones, of course, are going to go in the orange areas because these are cooler. So let's go with some bush beans and some Roma tomatoes. Now I'm going to try to add my bush beans in where my tomatoes are. So these are my cherry tomatoes over here in this little area. And then these are my pink bumblebee tomatoes. Now, bush beans have always done really, really well for me next to my tomatoes. So I'm going to try to add in a whole bunch of them over here. Probably away from my other beans because these are my Marvel of Venice full beans. So I don't want to add a ton of other types of beans around them because, again, if one of them gets disease, then they're all going to die. So I'll go ahead and add in here my bush beans. Now, my bush beans are actually, I think, jade bush beans, and then I think I have lake blue something or other bush beans, but basically I think they pretty much are the same thing. So I'm going to just add them in here, and bush beans are going to be at that same 6 to 9 per square foot. Last time I think I may have overplanted a tiny bit, but I also got a really big harvest, so I might try to do maybe like 7 or something. So 7 times 5, that's 35 plants, which is not too bad. I might end up putting a few more over here just so I have more beans because the family really enjoys that. So maybe I'll mark this off right now. But for my Roma tomatoes, the same thing. I'm gonna have to find a place to put those. All right, so I'm gonna try to add in my Roma tomatoes in here somewhere. I think what I'll do is I'll add them somewhere in this like spaced area here. Even along the trellis would be fine since I don't need the trellising space for anything else right now. And then I'll probably try to separate them with maybe some arugula, some kale, some other things around it to try and guard from, the other crops I have here. So I'm just gonna put in maybe like, let's say 1, 2, 3 square feet. That could be Roma tomatoes. So all of this can be Roma tomatoes even down here because they don't really need trellising. However, they are gonna need some sort of stake on the corners, which I don't currently have. So it might actually even be better to do them this way and do just 6 square feet of Roma tomatoes. Roma tomatoes, I do give a little bit more room, right? Because since they don't trellis, they get really wide. So they do need the full square foot. So I'm gonna do Roma tomatoes here. And then instead of having to do a stake or any sort of like floater weave or something, I'm gonna just try to trellis them up against the fence. So 6 Roma tomato plants, which has been significantly more than we need in the past. I mean, that has accounted for like all of our sauces, all of our tomato-based sauces, and even just eating that, those fruits right off the kitchen countertop. So I think 6 is probably good. So that accounts for our Roma tomatoes. So you can see how we just keep like knocking off things down the list. I try to get all of my trellising and all of my like crops that aren't herbs in first, and then of course this is going to be down here afterward after I pull up everything, which actually works out pretty well because these things, my Roma tomatoes will stay pretty much the whole season. My bush beans I'll probably end up leaving for the majority of the season, although they do tend to slow down a little bit when it gets a tiny bit cooler. But here in Florida, we don't drop like too much into the 30s. It's like 1 or 2 days at most. And so I'll start adding in maybe some arugula, right? Because that's something that we use a lot of. So I'll do maybe like these 4 square feet of arugula. And then maybe some mustard and kale and other stuff on the other side. So I'm gonna do A for arugula, and that'll be 4 square feet of arugula. And that'll work out really well because these can probably stay. But my arugula, I tend to use mostly for baby greens. By the time that they get a little bit bigger, for example, if I don't use them or if I miss them, then they go straight to the chickens because it gets like this really very bitter flavor if you let them grow more than that. So I'll do some arugula, and then I can put my, my Swiss chard will be pretty good over here along the fence line, I think. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do my kale instead, just because kale, the root systems get really, really tough to pull out. And so I'm just gonna fill in the back with kale so that, I can not have to worry about it for a while, because if I put it all in here, this is going to be a mess when I try to pull it out, a month or 2 down the road. So I'm going to just leave my kale in there. All right, so my arugula and my kale will stay. And then I'm going to start coming in here and filling them in with little pockets of my herbs and my Swiss chard, and maybe some mustard even. Now these things, some of these I'll probably end up leaving, so I might try to like do, you know, pockets of leafy greens and then pockets of root crops. But I am going to start running out of space here very soon, so I'm going to try to limit the amount of playing around I do with this. All right, so then I went ahead and added in some more crops in here. I put in my Swiss chard down here next to my bush beans, and then I have some Genovese basil just to add in, maybe, you know, get rid of some of those pests, because I know my basil will repel some of the things that can eat like other leafy greens like kale and Swiss chard, stuff like that. The same thing with my parsley. Parsley I found grows really well next to my tomatoes, so I put my parsley over here in my Roma tomatoes. And then I also, I probably will end up sprinkling some of my parsley seeds underneath some of the tomatoes, just as kind of like a cover, so that the soil isn't bare. Instead of using a mulch, I'll use like a live mulch like I've done in other seasons. The same thing over here, I added some mustard greens in here, and then some lemon basil, and I'll do the same thing. The lemon basil will kind of, you know, deter some of these pests because it is very fragrant. So I'm just going to keep adding in the same method that I have been. So I'll mark those off. I will add in my scallions just kind of in the corners. I'm not necessarily going to add an entire block of the scallions because I already have them in the pot. So wherever things are kind of like bare or missing, I'll just tuck some scallions in those little pockets. I will probably, I'm trying to think what else I have in here. I think I've done, for the most part, everything that needed to be planted out now, because everything left is kind of like for a cooler weather. So I do have to wait at least another month or so, which will give these time, like the arugula, the Swiss chard, the kale, the mustard. I'll be harvesting baby greens from those by then, and I will probably rip them up or at least interplant, or, you know, take out portions of them or something. So for right now, I'm gonna go ahead and probably I'll extend the parsley, because the parsley, I use it for everything. And then I'll add in my chamomile over here as well. I've actually never grown chamomile, but I've always wanted to, so I'm going to give it a lot of space this time and see what happens. And then in here, wherever I need like extra, you know, something, I'll probably come back in here and plant out more bush beans, which is never a bad idea because you can never have too many beans growing. And then in these last two, I will probably just end up planting out some additional herbs of some sort. So I know I have a packet of like herbs from last season, so I'll just kind of like mark this as X for now, and whatever leftovers I have, then I will add it in here. So what will end up happening in about a month, like I mentioned, is these will be ready to harvest. And so then I will probably leave one or two of them, or like one or two blocks or half a block, right, which ends up being 1 square foot. And I will just remove what I think I need the space for, and I'll interplant with some of that lettuce. I have Bronze Beauty, Merlot, some spinach, my corn salad, and then I'll make room for all of my root crops, which is really what, you know, fall is all about, in my opinion, planting out all of those root crops. So I will plant out all my root crops in this bottom row. If any of these things do really need to be removed, then okay, I'll remove some of those as well. But I think for the most part, this looks like a pretty good planting map. So then down here, when it gets closer, I'll come back in here and I'll fill out like when I decide what I'm actually going to remove. And then I'll come back in here and just make a little map for my cool weather crops. So that pretty much sums it up as far as, you know, my planting map goes. I do this every season, and it actually does really help to, you know, to map out the garden and prevent pests and, you know, control disease and all of that stuff. Now, I also do take this into the garden with me. I will print this out just exactly how you see it here with my little references, and then take this and make sure that I am planting just like I mapped it out on the computer. If you did like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to see how I did my last season garden for spring, I will leave that on the screen somewhere here as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!